They leveled my grandfather's fence at dawn, then handed me a lawsuit by lunch. And somehow I was the criminal, the trespasser on the ground where my first steps were taken. You know what I mean. Sprinting across gravel that bit into my heels as a yellow blade shoved through hand-cut oak posts that had been set long before my father learned to ride. The operator sat in a glass cocoon like he was rearranging office furniture, not erasing history, and a woman in a flawless black suit watched it all like a conductor, calm, clinical, almost bored. She said, as my grandfather's line just folded, "Show me the paper." I told her, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound like a man watching his heritage get fed into a grinder. They asked me to prove I owned what 5 generations had bled for. "Looks legit to me," one of them said, giving Mallory's papers back like a library book. The delivery truck brought a lawsuit, 25 grand in damages, court costs, daily fines if I put so much as a stick across their public road again. They bulldozed my line at dawn and billed me for the privilege by dusk. Finding a lawyer who enjoyed fistfights with HOAs is like finding a dentist who does house calls on Christmas. This isn't just your fence, it's a playbook. They win here, they win everywhere. He turned the easement over in his hands, squinted at the notary's seal. But once you see a crack you can't unsee it. You keep worrying it with your thumb. We got a forensic specialist, Dr. Ava Chun. Soft-spoken with the kind of calm that makes you think of scalpels and microscopes, and she spread comparison signatures on Ben's conference table like crime scene photos. Violation notices arrive daily, $500 each for obstruction, the mailman starting to look guilty about delivering them, and that's a sentence I never thought I'd say in my lifetime. Every morning I stood where the fence had been and watched neighbors glide by, some curious, some ashamed. Some convinced by Mallory's little town hall roadshow where she called me a selfish holdout blocking ambulances in progress. And we found we weren't alone. 4 other families with posthumous easements, same font, same seal, all abutting land Red Ridge Development had been collecting cheap like poker chips. 12 parcels bought 20% under market in a hot year. Bargains don't happen by accident when the market is frothing. Somebody's thumb was on the scale. We sat in the kitchen of Maria Alvarez, 72 and stubborn, hands that still smelled like tomatoes, and she said she signed papers she didn't understand for community good. The somewhere arrived at midnight in the form of a county employee who wouldn't give a name, baseball cap pulled low, truck with no plates. And when I declined, she switched to vinegar so quickly it was almost impressive. "You have no idea who you're fighting." That little smile that belongs to people who mistake cruelty for intelligence, and a security guy whose jacket bulged in a way that said, "Don't make us prove a point," filed an emergency motion painting me as a danger to public welfare. I lay awake and did the math, legal fees against cattle checks, fines against mortgage. Concerned citizens, with prepared lines about ambulances and children, and Judge Ruth Ellison leaned forward with that look that says safety matters, which it does, except not as a costume for theft. And Reed Calloway's wife's consulting income started to look like a hose running from the same hydrant. Mallory tried to pivot, throw her board under the bus, point up the chain. And the HOA was ordered to restore what they'd torn down, not patch it, restore it, oak for oak, post for post, the kind of remedy that actually smells like justice when you breathe it in. What followed felt like history exhaling. My line rebuilt by craftsmen who measured with twine instead of lasers, because that's how the old posts went in. Maria's garden replanted with neighbors bringing seedlings like casseroles after a funeral, Red Ridge crawling into bankruptcy under the weight of its own cleverness. Fraudulent easements voided countywide, so families got back what should never have left their hands. I took a chunk of the judgment and kicked off a defense fund. Paperwork and pro bono hours for people who can't outspend a cartel with a board title. Because once you've watched a suit called theft progress, you can't unknow how easily good folks get isolated and picked clean. the day Mallory's foreclosed showpiece went to auction. I stood by the new fence at sundown, palms on fresh oak warm from the day, cattle drifting like shadows, and for a second I could hear my grandfather's porch chair creak. You did right, boy. Maria's grandkids chased each other between tomatoes the size of fists. Her laughter carried on barbecue smoke. And the whole scene framed itself like a photograph I want in my pocket when days get hard. The kind of small-town evening that says maybe the center still holds if we keep our hands on it. Do we live in a place where the system fixes itself once you shout loud enough? Or did we just get loud on the right day with the right facts? And what happens to the family that doesn't have a bin? Or a Dr. Chun? Or a midnight envelope under a dead gas station light? I know what I'll do. Keep cameras up, keep neighbors close. I stood there in the porch light with a wrench in one hand and coffee in the other, staring at that poor animal and the wet dirt where my line should have been humming. Because the bigger scheme we cracked in court, the forged easements, the cash under the table, the commissioner's rubber stamp, it turns out that was just the front porch of the house. If you haven't had the pleasure, it's like a magic trick for developers. Draw lines on a map, sell bonds backed by taxpayers, lay pipe and road with borrowed money. Skim fees that look legal because they are, and if you can swing a right-of-way for your one necessary road, then you get to flip dirt into gold with a ribbon cutting and a drone shot at sunset. Red Ridge wasn't just chasing profit on houses. They needed the road across my ranch to justify $500 million in future bonds. And guess who underwrote those bonds on 3 other projects in neighboring counties? Callaway's brother-in-law, a quiet man with expensive shoes who prefers the photo to be of the ribbon. A sudden inspection from the state environmental folks about runoff. A letter from a private neighborhood safety council asking me to keep livestock odor down for community cohesion. All perfectly deniable, all meant to make me bleed time and money and patience. You're not crazy, Mr. Mercer. Someone wants you in cuffs for something you didn't do. And I could have hugged her right there. That I should call her directly before 911 if another stunt appeared. And I saved her number like it was a spare key under a rock. The next afternoon she called me first. You expecting a safety inspection? And when I said no, she laughed without humor and said, That's what I figured. Hold the gate. I'm coming by to observe. Luke, those disclosures are false by omission. They hide affiliated interests. If we get this in front of the right AG, they don't just lose the road. They lose the faucet that feeds the money. Subpoenas flying. Please hold your temper and your tongue for 2 weeks. We're almost at the tree line. I'm not going to pretend those 2 weeks were pretty. The drones came lower. Someone loosened my rear wheel lugs. Little rebellions in the daylight. Maria Alvarez organized a potluck on the courthouse lawn, and the whole town smelled like cumin and pecan smoke. Folks who'd been quiet for months shook my hand and pressed $20 bills into the legal fund jar without looking left or right, and said she'd been signing stacks she thought were duplicates under pressure from a supervisor who promised, "We'll fix the dates later, just routine backfill." The paper printed a polite headline about alleged irregularities, and Mallory sent a letter from prison that was half confession, half revenge note, naming names and underlining her own. And he introduced himself as Assistant AG Nolan Price and said, "Mr. Mercer, we'd like to walk the right-of-way with you." And we did, boot heel to do, fence to creek to rise. The editor of that stubborn newspaper stopping me by the cantaloupes with a notepad out and a face that said IOU Inc. Just got promoted quietly. Not the parade kind. And the 2 cozy deputies found new careers in lawn care, which is a poetic end if you squint. Carrington and Gray withdrew from 3 counties to focus on core clients. The one you'd storyboard if you were making a picture. Late afternoon, a line of trucks along my fence not to take, but to give. The old-timers teaching the young ones to stretch wire without over-tightening, Maria's grandkids handing out lemonade in plastic cups with fingerprints on the sides. Which is its own kind of him. And then, because life keeps a little grit in the gears, I saw it. A tiny glint over the far cottonwoods, a drone sitting still as a hawk in prayer. The neighbors on speed dial, because the alternative is pretending bullies stop being bullies when they lose one case. And that's not how any of this works. And a community that learned it can stand shoulder to shoulder when the clipboard brigade comes calling. And with a question that's bigger than my pasture, bigger than this county line. Tell me where you're at on that scale. Tell me if you've seen a version of this where good people got steamrolled because nobody had the energy to say not today, not this land, not this way. Drop your thoughts, your stories, your advice for the next family that wakes up to diesel at dawn. And if you think someone needs to hear this,